McLaren have genuinely ruined their own chances. They opened the season with strong momentum, a stable car package, and two drivers performing at their peak. But as the pressure of the title fight increased, the key decisions they made began drifting in the wrong direction, particularly for Oscar Piastri. Repeated team orders, unsynchronized pit strategies, and upgrades that didn't arrive evenly created a slow but obvious decline in Piastri's form, right at the moment when Norris and Verstappen were moving forward. Their biggest mistake came in Las Vegas. A double disqualification for both cars due to plank wear wasn't just a minor oversight, it highlighted a deeper issue. It showed that fundamental processes were not monitored with the precision expected of a team fighting for a world title. For a championship contender, this was not simply poor execution, it was a failure in risk management. The consequences were immediate. Points vanished, confidence dropped, and Red Bull were handed the perfect opening to attack again. From a position of strength, McLaren pushed themselves into a vulnerable situation entirely through decisions within their own control. So the question heading into the final two rounds is simple. What other mistakes are waiting to get McLaren penalised at the very moment the margins are tighter than ever? If you'd like to follow the full breakdown of how they ended up here, keep watching. And if you appreciate in-depth analysis like this, feel free to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. As the season unfolded, the pattern around Piastri became increasingly difficult to ignore. The most damaging moments were not accidents, not racing incidents, but choices made on the pit wall. The first major hit came as early as Australia, when Piastri's early aggression on fresh tyres put him ahead of Norris, only for the team to ask him to hold position despite having already taken more life out of his tyres in the process. It was his home race, and although the team insisted the instruction was to preserve the long game, the impact was immediate. Tyre wear escalated, his race tempo dipped, and the early advantage he had carved out evaporated. Piastri himself made no public complaint, but the internal frustration was clear. Suzuka was another quiet turning point. Many analysts agreed that McLaren pitted Piastri too early, forcing him into traffic and removing any opportunity to hold Verstappen back strategically. With the Red Bull still not at its most complete state early in the season, this was one of the few opportunities McLaren had to apply genuine race pressure. Instead, the early pit call boxed Piastri in, giving Verstappen the clear air he needed. Lando Norris later commented that the team had been a little conservative with some decisions at the start of the year, but by the time they realised, those lost points were already gone. Austria added more weight to the argument. The team prioritised an undercut for Norris, leaving Piastri outside too long on fading tyres. Piastri later admitted, "It felt a bit unfair today, and it was hard to disagree. With the pace he had across practice and the opening stint, he was on track to challenge for the win, but the delay left him stuck behind slower cars and forced into an off-sequence recovery drive that yielded far less than his pace warranted." Across the paddock, former drivers noted how similar decisions were accumulating into a real championship problem. As Christian Albers said in a column discussing McLaren's internal balance, "You cannot afford to mismanage your second car when both drivers are in a title fight." Those points always come back to bite you. Then came Monza. Piastri was again told to move aside for Norris after the team's own pit error left the two cars out of sync. While the justification was labelled as maintaining fairness, the optics were far more damaging. Piastri had been quicker on the day, and several pundits questioned the logic behind asking the leading driver to compromise their race for a situation entirely created by the pit wall. Even more puzzling was the repeat scenario in Hungary, where Piastri led comfortably before being instructed to hand the position to Norris due to a delayed pit stop on the sister car. Piastri complied, as he always does, but the maths was brutal. He lost 7 points that afternoon, and the psychological impact of having a win taken away under team orders was not insignificant. The drift widened later in the season when upgrades began arriving in uneven fashion. After Baku, the major developments were fitted to Norris's car first, and Piastri was left waiting for parts due to internal logistics. One of the reported sticking points was a revised suspension element that Piastri eventually declined due to timing and setup implications. From Baku onwards, the scoreline told the story. 115 points for Norris in the following 7 races, only 57 for Piastri. The difference was not simply pace, it was continuity, confidence and alignment between the driver and the engineering group. Small fractures inside a title-challenging team often snowball, and McLaren found themselves slipping into familiar patterns of imbalance. The tension peaked at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Over the weekend, Piastri hit the barriers twice and infamously jump-started the race. It marked the first visible sign that the pressure was finally catching up to him. Martin Brundle was blunt about it on Sky F1, saying, "Something's happened in Oscar's head. He's lost a bit of confidence. You only need to be a touch off in cars this close." Brundle rejected any theory that McLaren were intentionally shaping outcomes in Norris's favour, insisting that the team don't mind which of their two drivers wins the World Championship, as long as it's one of them. But even he admitted that the season had flipped. Lando suddenly started giving pressure, and so did Max, and Oscar started taking pressure. This is where the narrative truly turns. For months, fans debated whether McLaren's decisions were undermining Piastri's title push. But the real twist came not from internal conflict, but from the team's own operational collapse at the worst possible moment. The Las Vegas Grand Prix should have been a controlled damage limitation weekend. Instead, it became a disaster. Both cars were disqualified for plank wear after finishing in strong points positions, with Piastri losing 12 critical points that would have kept him within striking distance of Verstappen. What made the situation even more damning was the nature of the error. Plank wear is one of the oldest and most basic compliance checks in Formula One. It is not subjective, not open to interpretation, and not something a top team usually gets wrong. To see both McLarens fail the same check raised immediate questions about preparation, setup discipline, and ride height calculations across changing track conditions. Norris was quick to distance the incident from any insinuation of carelessness, saying, "It wasn't intentional. It was a tough, bumpier track than we expected." But even that explanation highlighted a problem. Other teams with the same track surface data managed to stay within the limits. Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes all cleared the checks. Only McLaren missed the window with both cars. When a team that has spent months pushing for perfection is tripped up by something this fundamental, it reinforces the argument that the pressure of the title fight had shifted from the drivers' shoulders onto the engineers and strategists too. As if to underline this shift, even Jenson Button weighed in during one of his Sky segments, commenting that McLaren seemed to be a little reactive rather than proactive during high-pressure weekends. He praised their pace but questioned the execution when it mattered most. Helmut Marko, never one to stay quiet, remarked that Red Bull benefited from McLaren's mistakes, which, while unsurprising, was difficult to contradict. The accumulation of errors painted a picture of a team that had the performance to challenge for the championship, but lacked the structural cohesion to maintain it. And so the theme becomes unavoidable. The very choices that placed Norris ahead in the standings are the same choices that weakened McLaren's overall campaign. They didn't sabotage Piastri intentionally. Instead, they created an internal imbalance that gradually eroded their own stability. By the time Red Bull stabilised their package and Verstappen sharpened his approach, McLaren were already fighting fires of their own making. The missed opportunities early in the season, the uneven upgrades, the questionable team orders, and finally the Las Vegas disqualification became a chain reaction that returned to them as a form of competitive karma. The irony is that both drivers were good enough to fight for the title, and the car was nearly complete enough to make it possible. But championships are rarely lost in one dramatic moment. They are lost exactly the way McLaren have lost this one, through a sequence of small decisions that stack up until they become insurmountable. Every moment Piastri was pulled back contributed to the larger collapse. Every strategic miscalculation narrowed their margin, and every point lost along the way opened the door wider for Verstappen's resurgence. With 2 rounds remaining, the uncomfortable question is no longer whether McLaren can win the championship. The question is what further damage might unfold if these patterns continue. If the pressure grows any heavier, and if internal decision-making remains inconsistent, what else is waiting around the corner? What other mistake might McLaren be penalised for next?